Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin. This is going to be part 2 of my conversation with Dave Duquette from Western Justice and Colton Woods as we discuss some of the pertinent matters of the day dealing with regulation and laws and trends within the horse industry that may or may not serve our interest well. So a couple of the things that I wanted to bring up kind of in conjunction with horse slaughter, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to wrap this up in a tidy package. I think the reason horse slaughter is kind of a necessary evil, and I even feel bad we're using the word slaughter, and that's the word we've been given by the enemy here, so to speak. It really is just processing. That's what we would call it if it was, in the cattle industry or
slaughter
sheep.
Cows you don't Joe dirt it and deer tay it up. It's not, don't church it up like. It is what it is. It's a word. It's the word that, to me, I used to argue with people about that a lot because they wanted me to make it processing or harvesting or all of that stuff. And we did try it for a while, but all they said was, you're just trying to, they just made fun of us for saying it that way instead of the other way. But anyway.
So the big part of that is that what it always has done is set the economic floor for the industry. So it used to be like in the 80s or 90s, there were even people that raised horses just like cattle, just for slaughter. That they never intended to ride them or anything. It was just to get a price on the hoof. And so at that point, the last time it was occurring, 90s, early 2000s, you would get like roughly 80 cents a pound, $1 a pound for a decent sort of a horse. And that's a horse with no papers, may not ride at all. So your average kind of horse is worth 1,000 pounds for processing, bottom of the barrel, end of the line, which also means if he has papers, if he rides a little, if he does whatever, the price just goes up and up and up and up and up from there. And so when slaughter was banned, which it actually wasn't banned, and I kind of think all of this is relevant, what they did was there was a requirement for USDA inspectors to be in those plants specifically to oversee and make sure that everything was run to a standard. So the horrific things weren't happening. We were trying to keep it as humane and all as possible. And they required the USDA inspectors, and then they defunded the USDA inspectors. So what we really have is a de facto ban. The plants cannot run because the inspectors aren't there, because we're no longer paying the inspectors. So that's actually what's going on. And because the plants aren't running, we now are having to truck those horses to Canada or Mexico. And if you think the standards here were bad, what's happening in Mexico is way, 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 way worse. And it's also a much longer trip and so forth. And so the price that you would now get for those horses goes from $1,000 to $100 or $200. And so it just took the legs out from the bottom of the industry, like you're talking about. So parts of the problems that we can.
Let me say something about that base, because I think a very important point right there is that I live in Hermiston, Oregon. We used to have a sale 2 miles from my place that was, we'd sell 14. They'd 3 times a year they'd sell 1,400 head of horses in 3 days, and that's where all those people from the Seattle, Tacoma area in the Northwest all traded their horses around. There was a lot of horses that came in from other places. You could buy a nice horse, but the floor, and what you're talking about, the floor, was always, if that horse could ride through the ring, it was going to be worth $800 to $1,000. I don't care if it was a 2-year-old colt or if it was a, whatever. It was going to be worth $800 to $1,200. And people would pay that. Now, people would bring a horse back because it didn't work out, and it was something way out of their league to be able to ride or whatever or manage, and they would bring them back and run them through. But they would always ride them through, because if you put a loose horse in there, then you had all the canter buyers, and the canter buyers would buy. They're going to pay, like you said, depending on the market, 60 to The most I ever saw one go for was $1.08 for a while. They were going for $1.08 a pound. So that to me, if a horse was rideable, came through there, it was always going to bring a certain amount, and that was your base for that major portion of the horse industry and the domestic horse in the United States. And that was gone. That went from $1,000 horse at $1,000 to a 1,000 pound horse that wasn't worth 10 cents. Or you couldn't even sell for 10 cents, or you couldn't give away. So that's what the floor in that market. And there was a constant turnover here at Hermiston. That was the beautiful part about this. You'd see people go buy a horse, and a couple months later they bring it back, or 2 years later they want something a little bit better. They save some money. They wanted to put more money on a horse. They'd get $1,500 or $2,000 out of this horse, this old trail horse, and then they'd add another 1,000 and buy a $3,500. Well, there's 1,400 head that would come through there. And another great, you alluded to a point. I got a friend in Nebraska he's got contracts for dude strings, canter buyers, or canter horses, and he has a rodeo company. And so he has buck and stock. And back when all of that was going on, just because the canter buyer bought a horse at the sale was not a death sentence for that horse. They would take him home. And back then there was so many young guys that wanted to break into the horse industry and cowboy and do all that. They had a bunch of young hard-ons. They'd take all them horses home that they've just bought at the sale, and they'd saddle them up and try to ride them because they were worth a lot more money coming back, like you alluded to. If they came back as a rider at the next sale, they'd bring them that same horse back and be riding it because someone else was too scared to ride it or couldn't ride it and let it through the sale, and a canter buyer bought it. Well, this friend of mine in Nebraska, it's only been a few years since he called me, and I use this testifying to APHIS. It's been about 6 years because it was during the Trump administration. But I talked to him about this guy that went and bought 27 head of geldings, loose geldings, at a sale in Nebraska. He brings them home. He still has those young cowboys there. They got on him and rode him, and he's got these dude strings that he's got to fulfill contracts for. And out of that 27 head, only 3 of those went to slaughter. Only 3 of them were no good for anything. They couldn't buck. They couldn't, or they didn't buck right, or they weren't what he needed for bucking strength. And then the dude strings, they weren't gentle, they wouldn't ride good, whatever. But he would make a lot more money on them if they went to the dude strings or to the bucking string, than he would, or make a pickup horse or whatever. So the whole thought that these guys are all evil that were there buying horses, it didn't used to be that way. It was like I said, the horse was worth a lot more alive than it was going to the plant.
One thing I want to jump in, you had mentioned 250 to 300,000. The highest numbers I've ever seen, we were usually between 90 and 110. The highest number I've ever seen going for processing in a year, I think, was about 130,000 head of horses. And so that's also at a time when we were 10.4 million horses in the U.S. So the entirety of what would go to slaughter was always about 1% or less. It was never.
Those are the ones recorded by. Those are the ones recorded by USDA. Those are the ones. That's the sad part. Or that's one of the sad things to me. There's a lot of horses that go over the border as breeders. A lot of them, and the only reason I know that, and I'm not going to mention what group of horses, but you can probably guess. It's a group that doesn't like horse slaughter or comes out publicly. They send vans of horses across the border as breeders to Canada, and they have a 6-month withdrawal period. So they go to a nice place and sit there, and then they end up at the plant 6 months later. That's how their issue of too many horses gets dealt with and still maintain the anonymity and the great feeling that they're not doing it or they're against it. But The only reason I know that too, because I know the guy at the plant that receives them. So he
Yeah.
told me, that
So
that's not a bullshit story, but I guarantee you it pisses a lot of those people off in that industry to know
yeah.
that I know.
So even taking that high number of 300,000, that would still have been less than 3% of the population at that point. And the only reason I bring this up is the analytical math side of me. We trade between 1 and 3% of the population trying to do good to save that 1 to 3%, good in air quotes. We lost 40%. And so for me, the math isn't mathing on there. This is one of those great example, unfortunate, but great examples of unintended consequences and how much worse things go. And again, the horses are still being slaughtered, just not in US plants where we have more control of the processes and the quality and everything of what's actually happening to those horses. So now that we've talked a little bit about economics, I need to pay the bills on the podcast here. So our sponsor for this episode is the Community for Animal Rights and Ethics, CARE. CARE would like to remind you that animals are sentient beings with feelings and families. You wouldn't walk up to a stranger on the sidewalk and start touching their face, would you? Why would you walk up to and start petting a dog? Did that dog give you consent? Are you one of the enslavers who thinks that dogs can or should be service animals? How dare you? Did you know that veterinarians charge to give medical care to animals? Animal health care is a right too and should be free. At CARE, we don't really own or have any direct experience with animals, but we still know more than you. If only you could understand how badly it hurts our feelings on behalf of animals we've never spent any time around, you'd see the error of your ways. You're drinking milk forcibly taken from concentration camps called dairies. You're eating the muscles and connective tissues of beings who were murdered. Farmers are raping animals left and right and forcing those raped animals to carry and raise children whose only purpose is to be murdered for your consumption. Be virtuous like us. Stop the radical cycle of enslavement and murder. Eat quinoa and acorns, only after they've fallen off the tree, of course. We are the real stewards of all of the animals, not those farmers and ranchers who risk their lives in fires and floods or slog out into the cold winter and take out third mortgages during bad years so that they can keep the herd fed. Those guys don't know anything about the hearts of these kind animals. You should really think about sending us some money so we can control your food supply. If we had more money, we could also hire Sarah McLaughlin to sing a sad song while we filled animals in horrible conditions rather than helping those animals. You mean exploiters. If we had enough money, we could ensure our master plans went through, like how wolves should be reintroduced into every state and all fences should be taken down forever. We're also going to go through with our second annual sleepover with the big cats in Denver. After last year's event, we lost our CEO, but he was proud to be dinner for the lions as nature intended. Karen, whose pronouns were Zer, would have been proud to know that her pink hair provided fiber to an entire pride and would have responsibly removed her septum rings if only she'd known they needed her for nourishment. Take solace that we've had a talk with these misunderstood beasts, and an animal communicator tells us that they promise not to eat anyone else at this year's sleepover with the big cats. Just think, if we achieve our noble goals, these cages and bars will all be open to come down and we'll all be sleeping with big free cats every single night. Go to your Venmo and show your support for the Community for Animal Rights and Ethics. All right, we've paid the bills on this one now. I'm particularly proud of certain aspects of that. And a fun fact, if you are or know someone who's allergic to cats, they are also allergic to lions, and that sounds a hell of a lot less nerdy. So,
well, we just need to bring more Haitians in to eat them.
There you go. Okay. Well, why don't we kind of get into the subject of animal rights versus animal welfare. And during our little break right there, Dave, you were telling a story about some of that with the wild horses and the Mustangs. That I know Colton has got a fair bit of experience with Mustangs and all of that too. So you want to jump into that and illustrate some of the realities of animal rights for us?
Yeah. So about uh, 3 years ago, there was some major problems, and one of my big problems with the wild horse advocates, as they're called, is that they basically are doing the exact opposite to the wild horses that they claim to be doing, which by demanding that they all stay out on these ranges, and that ranchers, they take AUMs away from, the animal unit measures, away from all the ranchers that have had permits and allotments to use all that grazing ground for 150 years, and they want those horses to stay out there all the time, and they're starving to death. And then they go out and say no, they're not. They take pictures of them in the spring after the green grass hits, and it's amazing what a and I Colton, I don't know if you've seen this. Have you got if you've gotten any skinny BLM horses or horses that are light, and you put them on feed, they will eat every freaking stem and they will eat everything they can. They're like a grizzly bear going to hibernate. They will actually balloon up faster than any horse you've ever been around. And it's in their metabolism to do that because that's the way they're raised, and that's the only ones that survive out there. Well, if you go through midsummer or sometimes even early summer through the fall, and you look at them horses, they're in rough shape. I mean, you're wondering how these mares that got a sucking colt on them are going to survive the winter, and a lot of them aren't. But the problem is nobody wants to nobody wants to admit that there's a major population problem, and they'll try to say that there's not a population problem, or the rangeland can hold all these horses. I'll go back to Lewis and Clark going across those areas. You look at his journals. Lewis and Clark had to eat his team, and he had quite a few people there, but they had to eat their own horses. So they had to eat their mode of transportation going across southeast Oregon and Nevada and those areas because there was no wildlife. Because without the ranchers that are out there, there's no water. There was no horses out there. And anybody that tells you that there was horses out there when Lewis and Clark went across there they're just lying to you, and they're making up pipe dreams. There was no wildlife to eat at all when they went through there. And it's very well documented. And what we're seeing out there right now is death loss of just a grotesque magnitude. And as a horseman, I go out there, and when you have a wild horse that wouldn't get within 400 yards of you if it was healthy, and they'll come up to you and try to eat your shirt or drink out of a water bottle, that's pretty. I mean, that's pretty scary to me. It's hard to take. You want to save all those horses as a horseman, but you can't. I mean, with the amount of horses that were out there, and it surprised me because we've been able to gather a lot of these big units out there and actually clean up a lot. But at every turn, these advocates, these so-called BLM horse lovers, they sue the BLM or the federal government at every turn to try to stop a gather. And they were successful for quite a while. And that exacerbated the problem to where we had over 100,000 feral horses out there. And then you go down to the Navajo reservation, they've got 100,000 horses on the Navajo reservation, which it doesn't have the feed for that kind of, the plant base for that kind of amount of horses. And they're starving to death to the point where a coyote can take them down. And coyotes can't take horses down. I mean, it's pretty rare. A cougar will jump on a colt and break its leg, bite it and break its leg, or do something like that and kill one every once in a while, a healthy horse. but coyotes can't take them down. And there's all kinds of video of that kind of stuff that's gone on. So we embarked on going out to tell this story. So we started doing a documentary, working on a documentary that we still don't have out, called Love to Death, because the advocates love those horses so much they're killing. You know, they love them to be out there and they're killing. And we went out, and part of our filming, one of the ranchers in Nevada told us, he goes, I know where there's some really skinny horses at this water source, and it's the only water source for 20 miles. So we went up there and looked at it, and there was just a grove on a side by side way up into this canyon, and set up next to this hole in the ground there was a cup of water there, and it was coming out of a side hill, and there was no vegetation at all there. And there's probably eight or 10 horses up there at that moment. And we go over there and look at this, and the horses that were there kicked off of the water hole or the water spot. And you went over there, and there was a cup of water there. I mean, it was no bigger than my hands and a cup of water. And there was a wet spot around it, probably 16, 18 inches at the time. So I went over there and I dug it out with a claw hammer, and this 3 or 4 year old stud colt, younger stud colt, who was a rack of bones, and on the Heineke scale, he was probably a 1. I mean, ready to tip over. But he'd been getting beat off of that water by this gray stud that had a couple mares there that looked like hell too. But he was making hot laps trotting around us and waiting for us to move away from that water, because that gray stud had moved away and went over there. And he went over as soon as we backed off 8-10 feet with a camera on a tripod. He came over there and started drinking as much water as he could. And the only thing he was worried about was that gray stud coming over there. And that is, to me, the epitome of what's going on. They either have water or they don't have water, or they have feed and they don't have water, or they have no feed and no water, and they're just starving and dying. And it's happening all over. You can go find that kind of stuff everywhere in Nevada, in Southeast Oregon. And if you go watch the trailer for Love to Death, because that's all we put out was a couple of little clips of it. There's 2 different videos that we put out on that stuff. But you go look at that and you'll see that stud horse, and you'll see how close he gets to us and what he does and how sad it is. And as a horseman, that's the saddest thing for me to see. I mean, you want to save them all, but you can't. I mean, there's just no way. And the only way those horses have a way better life when they get gathered and go get on feed and water, and they've got hair and all of that, and try to adopt them out. So hopefully programs like what Colton's doing with all these wild horses get a hold of them and make them into a useful animal. And you can, I'm sure Colton will say something about this, but you get a BLM horse and you get them broke and trusting of you. And I mean, they may not be talented or the kind of horse you're going to go show or do something with, but there's no nicer, kinder horse out there than a lot of these BLM horses. Once they realize where their bread's buttered and they have a lot better life. There's no more thankful horse to me than those horses.
Yeah, I've found with these Mustangs, like we always joke in the initial, we got 4 of them we just picked up last Saturday. We haven't had them week. And I was in there messing with them, and I always joke, I was like, just wait till you learn I got thumbs. Right. Like once they realize I got thumbs and I can itch them in places they can't reach, some of them just turn in their wild horse card. You know, they're like, hey, that's pretty good for me, man. And, my saddle horse that I use to start, I've started hundreds of horses off of her back. She's a Mustang that I took one of those Mustang makeover deals. And is she the most athletic thing? Not necessarily. But damn, I think one of the most valuable things with these Mustangs, particularly the ones that are born in the wild, been out for 2-3 years maybe, out there, is they know what real pressure is. Like they know what real stress is in life. And not to say that we want our domesticated horses exposed to that per se, but they know what it's like to go 20 miles for water, to not have feed, to go through these stressful situations in life, and then they get into a domesticated environment And once they realize that we're not going to eat them, they quit running from it, right? And they're like, oh, okay, like they're really willing to kind of hand their hat over. And um, so I've been thankful. I mean, they're not that anybody should go get one. That's a big problem too. But at the same time, they're they're just damn good horses at the end of the day, And one of the things that, and this is going to be controversial, I'll say it anyway, since we're on the topic of Mustangs, it's kind of irked me is I had a Mustang come in. A client sent this horse in a couple of months back, and it had a big knot in its neck. Okay. And I was like, what the hell's going on with this? And they had told me it had been sent to a trainer before it got to me. And so I was asking to make sure it wasn't an injury type thing. And I was like, well, once I can get it to the vet, let me take it into the vet. And took it into the vet. They x-rayed it. It was actually a microchip. And under my impression, most of those Mustangs that have been microchipped were going to long-term holding. And so this one might have just been en route to long-term holding and then got adopted. And so be it. And one of the things we're talking about, the baseline value of horses, is that some of these Mustangs are really nice animals. The four that we happen to pick up, I'm really damn excited about. I mean, they are just conformationally really, really nice horses. And I think it's a total kick on the balls for some of these Mustangs that be branded. They stick that brand on that horse's neck. And there's a group of people out there that support the Mustangs. And they're like, but the brand makes them cool. It makes them unique. It's how you know they're a Mustang. And I'm like, I'm all up for transparency. But if you look at the Western horse industry, whether it's calf roping, team roping, rodeo events, whatever, some of those people do not care whether a horse is registered or not. They want to have a really, really good horse. And to buy a great horse that is really good at its job, that horse is still worth good money, right? Mm-hmm. But you have a brand on that horse's neck that's like, I'm feral. It's literally the brand itself. The Freeze brand is branding in terms of a business sense of branding. It tells you what you need to think about that horse. And so whatever someone's perceived perception of a Mustang is, when they see that, either they're going to love them, they think they're dinks, or they think they're cheap, or whatever the case is. And this is something that's really bothered me the last year or so, because I didn't even realize that they were microchipping these horses. And I was like, well, if you're microchipping them, then why the hell are we branding them? Like, I'm not opposed to the microchip situation. Microchip them so it's easy to scan them when you're running them through the chutes. You got all your data. Cool. And let's quit branding them and let's let them be horses, in the sense that let's give them an elevated chance in today's market when they do get adopted out, that those horses now enter, in terms of a blank slate, they enter the domesticated horse society without preconceived notions. So when they do get educated, when they do have a good education to them and they are useful, that someone can evaluate that horse based on the horse's temperament, the horse's skills, the horse's ability, and not go, okay, that's all great, but I'm going to give you $10,000 less because it's a Mustang. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that does quite a bit of a disservice to those horses. And our business doesn't revolve around Mustangs, but I teach a lot, and these horses are great educational tools, and they need homes. Because if I'm coaching young professionals or people that want to be professionals in the industry, there's no skipping steps. So it's awesome to be able to educate a human on the process of really what it takes to take a horse all the way from start to finish, but then also give these horses a chance to get the hell out of holding and go on and have a life. But that branding situation, David or Daniel, I don't know if you guys have opinions on that, but that's one I've been sitting on for a while, because from a business standpoint, I want to sell these horses for as much as we can, but also I don't like, when they get dinged just because they happen to be born in the desert and got stuck with a U.S. government brand on their neck, and they're a phenomenally nice horse at the end of the day.
I hear what you're saying, and I totally agree with you on the sale part and the perception that people have of them. The logistically, for the BLM, having been around a lot of this stuff for a long time, as far as what they have to deal with, they can tell, they can see that horse standing in the corral. They know which horse it is. They know what it is, where it came from. They can talk to people about it without running them all through the chute. Those horses get run through the chute a lot, and it's pretty interesting to see how they get used to it or don't get used to it, one way or the other. But I think it would be a lot harder at the magnitude of what they have to deal with to have them just be microchipped, unless there's a reader they can read from a distance, kind of a deal. Because you go to these BLM corrals and there might be one day there might be 40 horses there, and the next day there's 400, and or the next time you show up, there's 400 or 500 of them that they've gathered. And it's really hard for them to, I mean, playing devil's advocate for the BLM employees, it's really hard for them to have to, I mean, it would be a lot simpler, and they may be in the works. I haven't talked to anybody lately. They may be in the works of doing that and transitioning over so that they're not doing
yeah, I mean, this is the first conversation I've kind of had publicly about it with someone and people that have, as professionals in the industry, that have an opinion on it. But I mean, frankly, we can play devil's advocate with each other here. Like, a lot of those brands are shit to read. Yeah. Like, unless you shave their neck, like, I mean, I've got one that even if you did shave her neck, you couldn't tell what the hell it says. And then I just sold one that had the crispest, cleanest, coolest looking brand that I ever did see on one. He must have stood there like a saint, for them to stick that one on him. And so, I mean, I see what you're saying in terms of like a management standpoint. My thought is, it's 2024. If you have a little reader right when they walk into that head gate, that chute, that pops it up on a screen or on a tablet that's like, boom, tag 7369, gelding, da 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 da, and it's just on a big screen where they can see it, or on tablet and someone managing it. It's like cattle. I mean, I do not agree with the cattle situation of them trying to get us to tag and all the tracking tags on cattle that they're trying to do. That's not what I'm saying. But these are government horses that the government's collecting off the range land and processing through. They need to have an efficient way to manage them. But also,
the other thing is having at a sale or at the sales, the brand inspectors can see a brand, but they can also, if they run the horses through the chute, we actually, it was interesting because a real popular thing we were trying to put together back in 2009 was called the Do Not Slaughter Registry. So we were going to put together a plan with microchips, and the iris scanning was just starting to come on. But every processing plant, here we go back to that, but every processing plant every horse that comes through there gets wanted for a chip. So they wand them and they check them for a chip. And if you had a reader on there, because BLM horses aren't supposed to be at the plant, right? They're not supposed to make it there. So if you had a chip in them and they come through there and read that, then somebody's going to get notified. And you're going to have a traceability of where that horse came from, where it was at, how it got there, kind of deal. But I think you're right. There should be something that they move towards, but I don't know, through the horse program, that's actually, again, if we get the correct administration in there, those are all things that can be brought up and try to get the BLM to start doing more of, if they're not already doing it. Like I said, I haven't talked to my buddy who runs the Oregon horse program. I haven't talked to him for a while. And that would be a good question for him, because he would know exactly whether they're transitioning towards that, or because I've never even heard of them being chipped, other than, that's a new thing for me. I
mean, we went, like, I took that horse in the vet, and then this is a funny thing, right? Because it's in the top part of closer to the top line part of the horse's neck. And the vet tech takes the x-rays and goes, "It's a chip." And the vet's across the room. And he goes, "You idiot. It can't be a chip. That's the top of its neck. His actual spine's in the bottom of his neck." He goes, "Not that kind of chip." And the vet was thinking it was a bone chip, is what the vet tech was saying. And the vet was like, "You idiot. There can't be a bone chip." He's like, "No, a chip." And it was 8:30 in the morning. The kid hadn't had coffee. He couldn't spit microchip out of his mouth to save his life. And it sent me to Google it, right? Dr. Google, to go, which Mustangs are getting microchipped. And then there was a little thing on their website that was like the horse is destined for long-term holding, which leads me to believe they're not probably having neck tags on them because they don't want them getting caught in something out there in a field or wherever they're in long-term holding pastures, whatever the situation is. So they're already probably managing those horses off of a microchip, even though they've got a neck brand on them, because those horses are not adoptable at that point. They're just going to live their years out of where they're at. And I mean, I just like solutions to problems, and this whole Mustang thing there, it can be taken care of, I think, fairly quickly if we can, like you said, get the right administration in, because I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they're grass-fed organic animals. And if we really wanted to do something about this and not let these horses just waste away in a holding facility, and we've got people on our streets, we've got veterans, we've got homeless people, we've got people that need hot
or
meals.
just Mhm.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Or just die out in a field somewhere without water because some animal rights wacko has sued us so that we can't actually do a damn thing with them, even save them in a lot of
Yeah, I
cases.
mean, we'd be actually incentivized to round them up so that we can keep them in good physical condition and then adopt. I mean, there's some really good Mustangs and there's some really not so good Mustangs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just horses to be horses, and the really good ones, let's put them at the front of the line to get them adopted, and then the other ones, let's not let them just sit around and waste away with no purpose in life in a feedlot. And whether that's, and I think we should, honor their life in terms of, like, if that means going and processing them, harvesting them, slaughtering, what do you want to call it, and turning into hot meals at the soup kitchen for people that don't have anywhere to go, I'm totally cool with that, right? Like that at least doesn't mean that we're killing them and just burning them or burying them in a hole somewhere to rot. It's like there is a
It's also
solution there.
from a food safety consumption deal, because they're Mustangs, we don't really have to have a withdrawal. This isn't something that came off of the track that might have steroids that needs 90 days to leach out of the systems when they're out there on grass, or withdrawal of an antibiotic or something. We know we've got a safe supply of protein right there with those horses. Yeah. I just to move things along here, I wanted to kind of bring back to the economics and kind of the notion of conservation here and who the real drivers of conservation are. So one of my hobbies is falconry. One of the most successful conservation efforts in history is the saving of the peregrine falcons from DDT in the 70s, and that was run by falconers who are actually hunters, and they have successfully repopulated peregrine falcons in the US and lobbied to get those particular chemicals, which were, causing essentially extinction of certain animals. We've also got a situation which is now resolved, but happened not that long ago, with an animal called the Schmidt horned oryx. And this is a large antelope native to Africa, particularly the Sahara desert region of Africa. They were actually listed as extinct in the wild about 20 years ago. And because they have a pretty unique set of horns on them, you would recognize them if you saw them. They had darted and moved some to Texas to put on some of these exotic game ranches. And because there was an economic incentive there to repopulate these animals, they went through trouble of even AIing them and things like that to blow the population up. So through hunting, the state of Texas grew to have a Schmidt horned oryx population of more than 12,000 animals, which is estimated to be larger than Africa ever had at any one particular time. It got to be so many animals, they started exporting them back to Africa to reintroduce them into the wild and get them off of the extinct in the wild list. Would you care to guess who lobbied to end that effort? And rather than have any of these animals on game ranches being hunted, to instead have them all euthanized and be extinct? That's right. It's our friends at these animal rights organizations. And I just bring that up because I think we need to illustrate the utter lunacy and extremism of the enemies that we've got out there. People tend to believe because it's the way they brand themselves and market themselves, that there are reasonable goals and aims within these organizations. And that's not, in fact, true. That's what they tell you to get your money and to lobby to you. One of the examples I like to use, I'm in South Louisiana. So we had Hurricane Katrina in 2005. And I don't remember specifically. I think it was the Humane Society of the United States had a whole television advertising campaign on saving the animals, and they send video crews out there to take pictures of dogs on a rooftop in the floods and all of this stuff to get you to crying. They raised over $100 million on specifically Hurricane Katrina. The Louisiana state legislature turned around and had to pass a law to force them to spend at least 10% of that money actually on the animals affected by Hurricane Katrina, because that's not what they do with their money. When you send the money, you're not sending food to a pet shelter. You are sending money to a lobbyist who's going to feed a congressman bacon wrapped shrimp to pass some law that ultimately is going to mean you can't own a dog anymore or something like that. And I don't think enough people realize how extreme these groups really are, to the point where a group that claims to have horses at heart and the survival and welfare of them at heart will sue the government to ensure that they die of starvation or dehydration out there in a pasture, because that's the natural order of things. And I certainly invite anybody who's listening to this that might not agree with me to do as Colton does and Google, because I promise you, you will be able to verify every single thing that I just said. To that end, gentlemen, if we can move the conversation along, we unfortunately do have some reasons within our industry to give those groups cause and videos to share on social media and so forth. One of the deals that Dave has been heavily involved in is trying to keep rodeo from being banned in California, and particularly LA, Los Angeles. And so I kind of wanted to let you get in on that, Dave. And then I also wanted to get y'all's opinions, because I know we spoke before. There are some things going on where we're doing a pretty poor job of policing ourselves. And I don't think there is a solution to any of this without us solving that one, where we actually do start to police ourselves a little bit better, a little more effectively, and stop giving ammunition to some of these wackos to go raise $100 million to buy off congressmen and fight us. So Dave, you want to talk about LA rodeo a little bit?
Sure. So LA started this. There's one animal rights zealot, kind of a guy that was the biggest pusher of all the animal rights laws that you see in California statewide. The ban on dog pet sales, dogs and cats at pet stores, all the different bans that have gone on in California, he was a part of. And now he's an LA city councilman instead of a state congressman. And he decided he was going to take this and ban rodeo in the city of LA. Well, let me start by saying, when we first started fighting this, the most and all the way up till now, the most common theme that I get from people in rebuttal is that just let LA go. They're a bunch of crazies. Let it go. Who cares? There's no major rodeos in LA. There's PBR, but there's no major rodeos. We cannot let the second largest city in the United States ban our way of life and think that it's not going to bleed out into every other city in the United States. So I don't care if you think everybody thinks LA's crazy, which it is. I mean, there's some crazy shit that goes on there. But if they ban the second largest city in the United States, bans rodeo, we're in trouble. And it's going to start bleeding off. It's already moved. Since this whole thing's been going on, it's moved to San Diego. They're trying to do it there. It's moved to, hell, they're trying to do it in Colorado. They're trying to do it, or they're trying to force it again in Pittsburgh, when we just got it to where PBR is going to be able to have an event there. New York, every year, there's a congresswoman up there that tries to ban rodeo. But New York's where they tried to give Happy the elephant the anthropomorphize it and give it human rights. So, and be able to sue on behalf of Happy, but I'm not sure who the person is talking to Happy that said he wants to do that. But anyway, the LA fight's been going on. So we've been fighting that pretty hard. We started the Western Sports Industry Coalition, brought everybody together, historic coalition that the Western world has never seen before. All of these organizations that are part of this are all competing organizations. Everybody, from some of the major manufacturers like Prefert and American Hat and others that are part of this coalition. It's a very interesting thing because they're all competing, whether organizations or entities that make a product, they're all in competition with each other. And everybody's come together in solidarity on this to the point where they understand the greater good and the need for this, and they're very happy and proud to be a part of this coalition. And we've spent real close to about $750,000 in the last 4 years fighting this in LA. Western Justice has collected the money. We pay the lobbyists, we pay the attorneys. We've worked on all this. We've done a great job. What a lot of people don't realize is if you look at this, I don't know if you can see that, but the four main groups on that coalition are PBR, the Charros, and PRCA and Western Justice. And those four groups, the main core groups fighting this battle, we've been on a phone call every Tuesday, a Zoom call, a strategy call with our lobbyists and our attorneys for almost 4 years, almost every Tuesday. I mean, there's been some that we didn't need to or didn't do it over holidays and things like that. But that core group has been working very hard. And if you go on Western Justice, you'll see all of our products like the talking points and all the different things that we've done on that page. We've got a specific page lined out just for the rodeo deal. So with that, we're kicking ass trying to keep this thing from happening. And we're all set up ready to sue the city of LA if they do pass this. Because if they do end up passing this thing, we're going to sue. And we feel like we have, what better city really to go after a freedom of speech, freedom of expression, that kind of a lawsuit. They're supposed to be the melting pot for that, right? Or the hotbed for that kind of stuff. So they tolerate everybody and anybody and everybody. So with that, if we do end up in that position, that's what we're going to do. And our attorney is actually, do you remember when Ringling Brothers won the lawsuit against the Humane Society to the tune of 24 million or 27 million? Ringling Brothers Feld Entertainment, they sued them on a racketeering suit and won. That's the biggest loss the animal rights groups have ever had. That same attorney is our attorney in LA. So okay. We're feeling pretty well healed going into this deal. It's likely that it could get a vote this probably during NFR. They like to try to do hearings and stuff like that during NFR, thinking that we're not going to be there and we won't be able to partake in it because the biggest rodeo event in the world is going on at that time. They've been pretty consistent with trying to do that over the last couple of years, but we've had to work pretty darn hard to keep this at bay. And if we don't stop it in LA, then it's going to bleed out to a lot of other places. And it sets a precedent for them to be able to go after. The animal rights groups right now are built. They're ready. If LA passes, they are ready to start filing all over the country. And the hard part for me was during COVID, people didn't realize, and it was hard for us to keep going because people were shut down. There was no money out there to help us. There was no, people were having a hard time. Business, whether it was businesses or any of the events or any of those groups, they were all having a hard time. And the reality was we actually put out an article right at the towards the end of the COVID lockdowns and showed how much money the animal rights groups had spent lobbying during COVID, during the 2 years of all that bullshit. They had spent, I may be wrong, but it was right at like $7.6 million lobbying. That's just the money that we could find, and that's recorded. So 7.6 million lobbying. And what did our side do? We weren't out, the agriculture wasn't out there doing squat, or the Western lifestyle wasn't able to do hardly anything. And that's where this organization, being strong and healthy, we need to be able to change that. We need to be able to fight back. And you alluded to that earlier, Daniel, about, you know, the animal rights groups get billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars to fight against us. And our people don't come together enough to be able to have that lobby. And we got to quit playing from behind. We got to start going on the offensive and protecting ourselves. And right now, the HPA, the Horse Protection Act, which I don't know if you want to segue into that now, but the Horse Protection Act, there's only one group that is exempted from the Horse Protection Act, and that's rodeo. And it's because some people that I know through the rodeo world back in the 80s got them when that thing first started happening. They got it exempted and showed that they've done such a great job of policing their own and creating new rules to make things more humane and more fair and more, you know, the animal welfare portion. They do a great job of that they were able to get exempted. But the Western horse world, because we were relying on the jockey club and all of those groups, because of running the horse council, they did not look out for us. So we're not exempted. We're not exempted from this HPA. And people think, you know, the common term is, you know, well, it just covers the Tennessee walkers. It's just for the gaited horses and soaring. No, it's not. If you read the HPA, it is going to come to every horse show out there. And I've been sounding this alarm, and people are, you know, sometimes I feel like it falls on deaf ears with a lot of people.
So one thing I'll say about that, a couple of new things. The PAST Act is the Horse Protection Act from 1970, and the PAST Act is basically an amendment, an extension of that, which is dealing with the gaited horse world. One of the things that's being floated there is, once again, bringing the U.S. Well, the USDA is already involved, but they're trying to strengthen it where it is a USDA inspector required to pass those horses before they can show. Okay. Yeah. And on the surface, that may sound good. Soaring does seem to be a problem in that world still. The problem with that is if that mechanism gets put into law, all they have to do is change one line, and now it's all horses, not gaited horses. And
it's already changed, yeah. Daniel. It states all domestic horses in the United States are under that HPA.
But I'm talking about the PAST Act specifically. Yeah. And then, as we talked about earlier with horse slaughter, that's how they actually ended horse slaughter. It wasn't by banning the plans or by making it illegal. It was by simply making USDA inspectors required and then defunding the inspectors. So if it becomes law that to run any horse show, rodeo, trail ride, whatever the event might be, you have to have USDA inspectors there. We are one simple amendment away from that ending entirely by having them defunded. And just, it doesn't even have to be a specific law. We now have this commonplace for these 2,000 page bills horse slaughter, the defunding of the USDA inspectors was slipped into one of these funding the government things by my state senator Mary Landrieu in
Yeah.
2006 and 7 when the Iraq war was going on, and they had to continue to fund the government to do so in order to keep the troops fed in Iraq and Afghanistan. One line was slipped in there that defunded USDA inspectors and ended horse slaughter. And so it's not like any of this stuff is being done above board and right in front of your eyes. And what we're voting on actually sounds like what we're voting on. It's always some back channel bullshit, sneaky attack that winds up really screwing the whole work.
Well, that's exactly what's happening right now. They're in the rulemaking portion of the Horse Protection Act, and they are they had US, just as an example of this is going to bleed out into the rest of the horse industry. A friend of mine was just at the Morgan Nationals, or whatever they call their big horse show, and there was USDA inspectors there. And come February, from what we're gathering from our sources inside USDA, come February, the rule is going to be that every horse show and every event, livestock event like that, has to be registered with the USDA 30 days, at least 30 days prior to the event. And if they don't, the USDA can come out and shut down that show or that event. And that opens it up to where they have the choice of whether to send inspectors out there or not. Now I'm working on stopping that from happening. And if we get a better administration in, we should be able to stop it from happening. But I don't know for sure, but I know it's a priority for some of the people that I know. And I can't divulge who they are or say anything about it, but the people that I know that are going to be in place are making that one of their top priorities right now because of us being able to push back and alert them to this situation. Come February 1st, it's supposed to be happening to where all horse shows will have to register with the USDA and register that horse show. And if they don't, they can come in. It doesn't matter if it's AQHA World Show or the NFR or wherever. They can come in and they can shut it down and stop the show. So if you don't register, so this is a crisis situation, just like in 2017 when we brought up, when I was still at Protect the Harvest, we blew up the whole ELD mandate deal. And it was amazing to me that the president of the AQHA had never even heard of it, had never even heard that this ELD mandate was happening. The commissioner of the NRHA, the National Reining Horse Association, was on the board or on the committee at Horse Council, the show committee. He was the chairman of the committee, and it's still, I think it may still be on the website of the American Horse Council. One of their findings on the ELD mandate in 2017 was that, and what they said was they did a survey of all their members, and as a result of the survey, they were going to inform people how to comply with the ELD mandate. They were not going to seek, and they said specifically in that paragraph that they weren't going to seek exemptions for the horse industry. And I blew that up, and everybody went nuts, and the American Horse Council tried to backtrack, but it was right there in writing, and that turned out, now we got a livestock exemption on that, and we had to put a lot of work into that. And luckily,
so I was involved in that deal too, the ELD mandate and all that stuff on when I was with the Louisiana Equine Council, and a lot of people don't realize how damaging that was going to be. It was going to at least make it $1,000 a year more expensive, and then add a whole lot of headache and stuff onto it. And then you might have had to split some trips into 2-day trips by law and things like that. And that's exactly the kind of backhanded stuff that they're coming at us with. I would also say, like we were talking earlier about kind of the integrity of all of this stuff. I really think the American Horse Council and the AQHA and some of these groups that are supposed to be representing us, they're utterly guilty of being asleep at the wheel on things like this. The American Horse Council has a policy which I think is utterly ridiculous. They've got 20 members on their board or something like that, and unless they have a unanimous vote to do something, then they don't act. So if one person decides, I don't want to handle this hot potato, they're out. They will not have an official policy or step in or do anything like that. And we're in war right now. This is kind of that idea of oh, we might offend someone. Someone won't like us if we actually have a backbone and stand up here. And they have sold us completely down the river as far as I'm concerned, and there's plenty of animosity toward them that is completely deserved, and I'm sure other organizations as well. Here's one of the other things that I kind of feel is a big an unintended consequence that's going to come about. Dave, you and I have definitely been involved in the industry long enough where the term serviceably sound would have been around, and that kind of seems to have disappeared. So Colton, I'm actually going to ask you, I don't know if that's something that you may be just on the edge of too young to have been around, or if you have come across it, but it used to be kind of a time honored thing that when you had this old performance horse that had been down the road and now he's 22 and maybe he's got a little navicular, a little of this or whatever, and he's not 100% anymore. That became the kid's horse, the lesson horse. He wasn't going to be high performance, but he's been there, he's done that, he's going to teach the next generation. And it was really a time honored thing and kind of a badge of honor to be that type of a horse. And now we have this movement under the guise of ethics where, you know, if this horse isn't 100%, now you got to shit can him. You can't do anything with him. You can't put a video on social media because people are going to come in and start harpooning you for riding something that's lame when they don't have any idea of the context of what's going on and all of this stuff. And I think that is contributing greatly to the demise of the industry here, and also taking a group of horses that we owe a responsibility to. And again, with that idea of cutting the economic floor out from underneath them, and they become neglected instead of loved and well cared for, and so forth. So Colton, I just want to throw it to you, and I don't mean this with any condescension or anything. You are 31, so I don't know what you've seen versus what I've seen. So I'm gonna throw that to you.
Yeah, you know, I mean, the term itself, I mean, it has been on the radar probably the last 24 months, just as far as the actual verbiage of serviceably sound, right? Because it hasn't been a term that's been thrown around a whole hell of a lot in general. That being said, the principle of the matter, right, of looking at a horse that has some wear and tear, has a lot of miles, and is that horse still useful and have a place, right, to where that horse has a point of value, so that way someone can continue to take care of that horse and provide that horse with a good life and those sorts of things. Because the reality is that how many people can just afford to have a bunch of pasture pets versus having a horse that maybe is a little lame or something like that, but the horse still has a job. And it's funny you brought this up, because I bought a horse as a 2-year-old from a good friend. They bought it from a really well-renowned ranch, and I bought this horse to be my next bridle horse, to go down the cow horse route, be a saddle horse, those types of things. And I went to just lightly get her started, and like a week into work, she just in groundwork, just round pin work, just off. I'm like, that's weird. You know, a little short in the toe, let her grow out. She'd been pounding feet on a big ranch, you know, so do that, get some good foot on her. And this process goes on for a while. I kind of realized, like, okay, we got some work to do. End up shooting x-rays. She apparently at some point had whacked her knee on something, and she had a bone spur in her knee. And so basically she'd get into a little bit of work, it'd get inflamed, she'd show up lame. Okay, we did injections. She's a 4-year-old now. Like, haven't really been able to start her, because every time I start working with her, she shows up lame. And that particular horse, if you keep her at a walk jog she's fine, right? But you start asking her to lope around a bit more, that knee gets sore. And so for what I need her to do, that isn't going to work, right? So I put her for sale. In today's market, she's bred pretty nice. She's beautiful Bayrown horse, just absolutely gorgeous. Like, I just don't have enough property to have another brood mare, right? Otherwise, I'd keep her and breed her. But in today's market, the biggest value that I could have for that mare is as a brood mare. But the people that are actually, they're coming to pick her up next week that bought her, they paid a fair market price. They stole her for how nice of a horse she is. But their thing was, hey, could we still ride her? Could we walk, gather cows on her, jog her a little bit? They're like, it's not hard, rough country. She'd just have to walk, jog a little bit, and then she'd have a baby each year. And could she needs to at least be able to help us go gather cows and that serviceably sound portion. She doesn't have to be a performance source. She doesn't have to do, they're not going to, he goes, we might drag baby calves on her. He goes, we're not going to rope yearlings on her or anything like that. She doesn't, it's not hard physical work, but she has to be serviceably sound to a certain degree. Right. And that in itself, fortunately, with that particular man, I told him, like, hey, I think she'll be just fine at that, with a light job. And she's going to get to go up to the corner of Idaho, Nevada, Utah, up in there where they ranch. And that, like, they've sent, I mean, I'm excited for that horse. Like, she's going to have a light job, and she's going to have some purpose, and she's going to be able to have some babies for him and stuff like that. Otherwise, if I get so caught up on, oh my gosh, no way, you can't take this horse, like, this horse has a bum knee and she can't go off and have a job, and I let my emotions get wrapped up on the fact, then I hold down what's the future of that horse, right? Like, what ends up happening for that horse? Because this is a business. I can't just keep her around to keep feeding her hay as a 4-year-old, and she's got to go somewhere. And so I think that as the younger perspective on the serviceably sound, I think it takes just a little bit of common freaking sense to understand that we don't want our horses to be in pain and those types of things. And we can adjust a horse's job to fit what they are capable of doing. And too much of anything is a bad thing, right? So if you have that 24-year-old horse, maybe that horse is only going to get rode twice a week, very lightly. You start riding him 4 days a week, that horse is going to be too much. Then just adjust. But, like, let that horse have some purpose. So that way, I think with that purpose comes the ability that people will take good care of those horses, and they don't just chuck them out on a mountain on the East Coast and be like, cool, like, just turn you loose or tie you to somebody else's horse trailer at the sale barn. And that's not doing any good service by those horses.
I've got we have a 17-year-old gelding here that's won probably over 50 plus thousand. A couple rifles, several saddles. I mean, he in the non-pro cow horse. I mean, he was a machine, big, pretty bay horse, about as pretty as they get. And he's here for the duration, but he is not sound. I mean, you can't go show him anymore. And it just came on. We don't know. It's a collateral ligament issue in his front end. So it's not something that we can go put any pressure on him with. But he can go trot people around, and people can learn a little bit on him. Not a lot, because we don't let anybody turn him around. I mean, the horse had a +1 turnaround. So, we're not going to go say, hey, go turn this horse around, because he will try, and so that kind of stuff. I mean, and there's another one coming back to a client of mine that's 21 years old. And he's coming back because she won't sell him, but she just leased him out to this lady to go ride. And he couldn't go do the show horse deal anymore, just like Colton was talking about. You go pound on him or get him pounding the ground a bunch and doing all the cow work and all that stuff, and he's going to get sore. But to just go trot around for somebody, he's a great horse. You just go trot around, lope around a little bit, and do little trail riding, that kind of stuff. He's a great horse. Well, that gal had to move, so he's coming back to her. But he takes maintenance. I call it maintenance, serviceably sound. If you got to maintain one, you do some maintenance on them. It's just like us old people. I can't get away with with not having some supplements or some specific maintenance to deal with my aging body, you know. So I still work out every day. I do, you know, all kinds of stuff that most guys my age don't do, but it's because I take care of myself, and I'm certain am I what I was in my 20s and 30s? Hell no. But I'm still serviceably sound. You know, I can still go do stuff. I used to think I could pick up anything that wasn't tied down, but I can't do that anymore. You know, but
Yeah.
I know what my limits are. And it's the same thing you got to do with horses. There's a lot of great horses out there that love their job. That bay horse I was talking about, if you go pull the other horse out of the pasture where he's out there trotting around yelling at everybody, trying screaming, wanting to come out because he wants to go get rode. He's only happy when he's standing in the arena with everybody else and getting rode.
So the next thing I wanted to jump on here is sort of the topic where we've talked about some of the exterior enemies, and now I want to talk about some of the interior enemies. And sometimes we are our own worst enemy, because there are situations where we give the general public actual cause to worry about what the hell we're doing over here. And I think we have done a pretty poor job, certain sectors more so than others, but in general, we have done a pretty poor job of policing ourselves. You both had written recently on the USDF, and I guess I'll let y'all just take that and kind of talk about the new situation there. But I do have a few other examples I wanted to touch on as well. So I guess Dave, you wrote the original article, and Colton, you kind of added some thoughts to that. So Dave, I'll let you start off, and then Colton, you chunk your hat in.
Well, when I first read that article of what USEF is doing by allowing anonymous sources basically to tell on somebody, I think about the first thing I think is, oh God, what could go wrong, right? It's people telling on people that are doing something that they consider to be inhumane to a horse. Well, and then they're going to go send investigators out there to go deal with this. For one, I think USEF is the probably one of the dumbest smart people groups there is in the horse industry. And to think that they're going to be able to afford to go do what they're going to, the can of worms are opening up. And mind you, USEF represents 3 to 5% of the horse world. I mean, you know, the domestic horses in the United States. I mean, if you went off the 10 million number, then it's 3%. But if you go off the 600,000 number, it's 6%. So, but the problem is, I've seen this happen in the rodeo world with some of these laws that they've passed in these towns, where the animal rights groups will go out and pick somebody that they're going to target that has animals at home, maybe nothing wrong at all, and they'll go target them and start calling the authorities on it. So if you think that by setting a precedent, by putting this law out there, if these people are that ignorant to believe that they're going to be able to quell that sort of a mentality with these animal rights groups, they have no clue what they're talking about. These people are going to, when they put this out there, especially publicly, they're going, okay, come on. They're inviting those animal rights groups people to go to somebody's house, take some pictures from the road, and go and make a complaint. And then they're going to get let me go back here. So a prime example was yesterday, one of my gals that works for us, that checks all our comments and stuff like that. She was on one of the pages where this gal kept trolling all the different shares that we did on that article. So she was trolling and putting this deal on there that this is a good thing and it should be done and blah, blah, blah. And it's all great. So what my gal did was she put up a deal about Gary Dassinger up there in South Dakota. That we did a movie when I was at Protect the Harvest called The Dog Lover. We did actual movie about that whole situation. And that was a group of veterinarians that went in there and falsely or falsified humane issues on a dog kennel to get rid of this guy because they were pissed off at him. So that was a professional veterinarian that went in and did that. And they're saying this gal was talking about how, well, if they send a vet out there, who wouldn't want a vet to go out to their house and check on their animals for free? It's like that's not the way it's going to be, and it's gonna end up being a problem for everybody. I mean, this is such a can of worms that these people did not even contemplate what's going to happen. And I mean, they've got no voice of reason. And most of these groups like that, like the USEF, have a bunch of businessmen that are running those, or people that are in business, corporate type people, or things like that. That they're very wealthy, so they get put on the board. They really have no OJT, of the horse industry or what's going on. They only know it from that higher level. They don't know what happens in the real world. They don't pay. They're too busy running a business to pay attention to what's happening with all these animal rights groups and what they're doing. And hence that's why Western justice is out there and needs to be out there. But they don't have the common sense to know that they're opening up a huge can of worms there that's going to cause problems, not just for their 3 to 6%, but for the whole horse industry.
Colton, you got any thoughts on self-policing and things we could do better or need to do, or where we're failing?
Well, I think the number one thing we don't need is more organizational oversight in terms of telling us how we need to be doing it. And I think that part's really clear, because a lot of the things that I've shared through TikTok videos or YouTube videos and stuff like that is very much saying, hey, I've poked really hard at some of the issues to the point that it's made things pretty sore and it's made some people mad. And they're like, well, what are you saying? Or do you think that in more people, there needs to be more oversight? Because like Europeans have like British Horse Society, right? And China has really latched onto that as well, to follow that model. And big organization oversight, big government is not high on my priority list by any stretch of the imagination. And so it does come down to, where does it begin? Right. And my big thought is, within our industry, it starts with the professionals, because we're leading the front, right? We're the ones setting the example for the non-pros, for the amateurs, for the recreational riders. And then overall having a little bit of that culture of, we expect more of each other. We have more information at our fingertips than we've ever had before in terms of how to do things better. And so the whole idea that, I've been pretty loud spoken on not putting out things that are going to give the other side ammunition. And people then take that and go, so you believe that keeping it closed behind closed doors and not? I'm like, no, I don't believe in handing the enemy bullets to shoot me with this. How that also means that we need to deal with the issues that are in front of us, and how do we actually overcome those things. And so when it comes to that self-policing side of things, I really do believe that it's a culture shift a little bit, and expecting more of each other and upholding that standard. And that sounds really kind of romantic to a certain extent, because it's like, well, then how do we shift the tide that way? But we have to look at common ground. And having spent the first part of my horse training career was training English horses, and it was hunters, jumpers, and dressage horses, because that we were in Lexington, Kentucky, and that was the market that was wanting to send horses. They're paying the bills. The Western horses what kept me sane. We moved down here for the cow horse side of the industry for my own personal enjoyment. And when we look at that side of things, like when I shared Western Justice post last night, the one thing I was like, that the USEF is really big on, through this new rule of basically anonymous sources being able to make these claims. And this is going to, my wife was like, I talked about this because I was really considering, because there's some stuff that I don't like about the English word. I was like, you know what? My wife has a really nice jumping bred horse. I was like, I'm going to go show him the jumpers. Right. Like, I'm just going to go stick it to him and just go do it, because I'm competitive that way. And this was about the same time that Safe Sport was popping up. Right. And I don't teach non-pros and amateurs and that sort of thing. But this is the same fucking principle, in my opinion, in with the way safe sport works. And safe sport, the thing we have to I understand is that has been in the Olympics as a thing to make sure everything stays safe as it should for a long time. But the difficulty that we've seen within the English communities, particularly through SEF, is that you're guilty until you're proven innocent, and they will seize your business when the allegation comes in, whether you're guilty or not, which completely goes against everything this country was built on, which is you're innocent until you're proven guilty. And when they've built, and that's what I'm real like, that's the concern with this particular rule, is that people can just come in, make allegations, and then even if you're innocent, they have already crucified you because they have cancel culture. So you will absolutely, your business will be tarnished as a professional, because it doesn't matter. They're going to drag your ass through the mud so hard and so fast that you're screwed. And that's the big thing I think people have to look at within this overall dynamic. And Dan, you were mentioning this earlier, right? Which is that both you and David and Dan were talking about the fact that the way that they're going about getting control in our industry, right, is about putting these USDA inspectors in these potential. And I think that it's horsemanship, horse training, life is about patterns. They've already played this game and they've been successful at it, right? So when you guys were talking about that, and in my brain, I'm like, it's just a pattern. And I hope that whoever's listening to this lets the weight of that settle in really quickly, and really, because it's dark and it's heavy, because they've already run the playbook and they've won, because they had the USDA inspectors in the horse slaughter facilities, and then they defunded them. And guess what? We were talking about this before the podcast started. This election is going to go one of two ways. And one side of that coin is all about defunding some stuff, right? That is exactly what they will do. And if they're going to put USDA inspectors in our horse shows or any type of event, a horse sale, and all they have to do is pull funding, they've already done it. And so between the cancel culture side of things and the fact that the playbook's already been run and there's teeing it up for the next phase of it, I think I wanted to bring that point up, because sometimes it seems like a lack of urgency in the horse industry. Like people start hearing this stuff, but then they're like, oh, well, yeah, okay, that's good. David and Western Justice are out doing it, so we're going to be fine. And it's like, fucking hell, guys. Like this is happening right now. Other people, the enemy, are waking up every single day trying to drag this industry and completely obliterate the lifestyle. I mean, they're convincing people that cows farting in the atmosphere is worse than China's entire factory system. And I lived there for 2 years. Like, you guys, we prayed for a typhoon to come through because we got 3 days of fresh air, because all the skies are completely gray, right? And people are convinced that our cows are the issue. And it's wild, because Danny, you did your funny fake ad thing. And it was, I think David and I were both giggling, throughout the thing. But then I'm like, crap, this sounds too realistic. Yes. Like there's people that actually believe that shit, like in this context, I'm like, I know that it sounds extreme, but that's who we're up against as an industry. And so when to round it back to the self-policing side of things, it's not that we don't need to discuss the issues that we have in our industry, because we need to talk about them in a way of how are we going to move beyond this and provide each other with some support. Are the organizations that, whether it's NRCHA, NRHA, like the whole set of that situation is fucking mind-boggling to me, that they would even entertain the idea that we would legally dope horses to go show. Like, who in their right mind can sit there and say that that is a good idea at all? And even just from a horseman's standpoint, nonetheless, like a political game of not giving the other side ammunition. And so I think that there is a little bit of what Dave was saying with the rodeo world, where there are rules and regulations to make sure that it's progressing, right? But not restricting. And I think that perhaps that angle on it, we have to understand that whether it's any of these disciplined organizations per se are actually making rules and regulations for the progression of the sport, so that way, not to restrict people on too much, right? But to set the horses up for success and set the people up for success. And that's a hard fine line to ride, because then people are saying you're talking about more oversight. And it's like there probably are certain things that shouldn't be done. And if we make those certain things against the rule book, right, then we're in good territory. Right. We're not out here necessarily telling people how to train horses, but we are certainly telling you shouldn't be drugging your horse to give them the show pin. Right. And I think most of us should be able to agree on that. And you look at certain stupid situations, and for example, in the English world, right, that you can use certain products that are calming supplements, but you can't use certain products like CBD for those horses. Right. But if you watch the chain of command where the money goes, the people, the reason certain products are allowed in those organizations is because the people on the board have stakes in those companies. And it's like, just follow the money versus, and it's in that sort of stuff, we have to weed the trash out, drain the swamp, weed the trash out, get rid of those certain things, because that's another big issue. So I won't open that can of worms, but,
no. I think we lack leadership, which is part of why I brought David and Western Justice onto this one. There are too many people who are only concerned with their self-interest, and in the industry there are not nearly enough people who feel a stewardship or a responsibility for the future of the industry, and I think that is ultimately the problem. And I mean, one of the deals I've had a pretty big problem with is Gunner in the reining world. He may be the greatest stallion of all time, but he's also passing on deafness, and we know that he is. And there's got to be a talk about that. And ultimately, look, I believe, Colton, it's your deal. If you want to breed your mare to this horse knowing that there's a risk and you're going to accept the consequences, then this is American. I think you should totally be allowed to do that. But I also think there's an ethical aspect to that where we have some consideration. Is this really the best thing for the industry, or is this giving us a black eye in public? And I'm using Colton as an example. He's not tying in that. I hope that's obvious.
I like cow horses. I'm not breeding no Gunner.
Yeah. It's okay. I'm also realizing this is a podcast, and so you can't see the facial expressions and all that kind of stuff necessarily. So I want to wipe your slate clean there. But we got some things going on in rodeo. I just wrote an article about this, the starfish position around the third barrel. That shit needs to go away. I mean, that's ridiculous and absurd, and it's not justifiable. Junior Noguera going out there and giving himself a concussion by slapping his head on the horse's sacrum every time, and his mouth is gapped open like this, and all that shit is ridiculous, and it needs to go away. It does nothing but give us all a black eye and give actual ammunition to the other side. And I don't know exactly how we solve it, but we need to get the word out there a lot more and get people more aware that there is a fight going on, and we're a lot closer to the end of it than most of you realize. This is not a Chicken Little situation. This is the writing is on the wall, and y'all need to turn around and look at the damn wall and see the writing kind of a situation.
The hard part, I think the hardest part, Daniel, is that the hardest part's always been for me is, and I alluded to this earlier, but being able to get people to understand what's going on without giving away everything we're doing is the hardest thing, because there's so much that goes on. That PACT Act that Trump passed, there was a provision in there for a while that we got out through in a way that I can't even I can't explain to the general public, but it was a very, let's put it this way. President Trump saw it and understood what it was. But this one provision that was in there at one point said that you couldn't weigh more than 10% of the animal's body weight that you were riding. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I was still weighing 235. That would put me on a 2,300-pound draft horse. And you can sure as hell bet I'd be riding a side-by-side of a four-wheeler instead of a draft horse to go gather or dirt bike or something. But those kind of things that happen, we can't come out and talk about all these things that we do, but there is so much going on. And we're at a critical stage for the horse industry, and our people that are supposed to be from the associations or the lobbyists or whoever you want to call it are not telling the truth, or they're not involved. And I'll go into lobbyists a little bit real quick, because a lot of people don't understand lobbyists. People ask me if I'm a lobbyist. No, I'm not a lobbyist. I have lobbyists that do work for me, so I don't have to be a registered lobbyist. But you also have to realize that a lobbyist in DC especially, and even at the state levels, has to deal with both sides of the aisle. So they're not going to go upset the apple cart too hard either way. And they're not going to push. And if you look at a lobbyist in a way that the way I look at them, which is they're a facilitator to get me where I need to be to explain what I need to explain. And they're not, you would think if you hired a lobbyist for $10,000 a month, they'd go do all the work, right? They'd go get all that work done. They go coordinate, a good one will go coordinate all the things that we need to do, but they don't actually do the work because they're not going to go piss off, like in LA, we got our lobbyist is a lifetime Democrat, but we can't get to any of those offices with a Republican lobbyist down there, and he understands what we're doing, and he's very good about what he's doing and being there. He's very forthright, but he is a Democrat. Most of the help that we've gotten over the years were either from the Blue Dog Democrats, which there's very few of those left, and in the Republican side. We've always gotten our help in agriculture and the Western world or the horse world from the Republicans. Now, there's been there's some pretty loud ones out there right now that are fighting against us. And, a lot of people love Matt Gaetz. I can't stand him. I think he's a peckerhead. I like some of the things he says about, and his support of Trump and his diehard support of Trump, because I'm such a Trump supporter. But Matt Gaetz is the biggest, he is the biggest animal rights pusher in the Republican Party. And a lot of people don't know that. And that's, those are the kind of things that we know how to go manipulate and deal with, that the average person has no clue that that's going on. They love him. They think he's great. Anybody that's a Trump supporter loves him. But you might be old enough. I'm sure Colton never saw him, but the old Kibbles and Bits commercials where there was the bulldog walking, trotting down the road, and the little Jack Russell or Chihuahua that was running around him was doing all the talking and jumping over the top of him and all that stuff. That's what I call Matt Gaetz. He's that little Chihuahua, and Trump's the bulldog, and he's like that little mouthy Chihuahua that runs around him and use him for protection. But those are the kind of things that we have to deal with, and the horse industry needs to realize there's a lot of sausage making that goes on, and a lot of things that happen behind the scenes that we never can talk about. I mean, we can't go divulge how we do it or who we're talking to or what we're doing to get it done. But because of where we've aligned ourselves with all these politicians over the years, I don't have to do a lot in DC. What I do is I make a phone call because I'll know somebody, some congressman or senator on a committee where something foul's going through, and they can either hang it up or get things changed for us. And that's how we do it. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that nobody ever sees, nobody's ever going to hear about, that we have to do. And the complacency of the average person in the horse industry, complacency kills, right? So we have to quit being complacent. And if they don't want to worry about it, help us be the ones to worry about it. Become a member. I don't care if I had, you know, 30, 40,000 people at the minimum $25 membership, we'd have plenty of money. I'd have the staff to be regulating everything going from different states and be able to stay on top of that stuff instead of worrying about people calling me at the last minute and then us having to play from a defensive end, not an offensive end. So that's a huge deal for me.
One thing I do want to make clear here too, we kind of are playing a little bit of the devil's advocate with this. None of us are assholes that want to see horses get abused. I spend my life teaching about bits and better ways to use those kinds of things. And there's plenty of stuff I see at the Olympics and all that churns my stomach. But the solution to that is education and teaching people better ways, and what you're seeing is really this and it's not that, because we have a lot of dogma out there that's incorrect but gets passed on nonetheless. It isn't a case where some law is going to solve any of these problems. And I also want to say that, you know, I guess I have the dubious distinction of having been in this long enough now where my beard is gray and all of that. And over 3 decades, it's gotten way, way, way better. Okay, so the problems that we have now, it's kind of, I have another friend, Colton, and I do Patrick King, and he just did a video about, you know, when we see some of these videos of the abusive type topics, that you'll always have these people that jump in and say, oh, well, I've seen way worse. I don't think that's something to just be dismissive about. The fact is, the cases of air quotes abuse that we see now are a tenth of what they were 40 years ago. And it's not to excuse that there is still abuse. There always will be. You're always going to have that one bad apple that's going to do something that they shouldn't. That exists in plumbers, that exists in doctors, that there's always going to be some level where 3% of the people just won't do shit right or whatever. But the cases that we see in both how bad it is and how frequent the cases come across, they are so much better than what it would have been years and years and years ago. One of the things the clinicians are bad about, and I kind of hate this, is they tend to make themselves sound better by talking about how bad it is, and they give these examples of a horse being snubbed to a post or 3 days without water. That shit doesn't exist anymore. It hasn't existed for a long time. They're talking about common practices of 50 years ago as though that still exists right now. And again, I'm not going to say you can't find some guy in the backwoods of Idaho doing that, but as far as common practice across the industry, all of that stuff has been gone for a long, long time. Like the real cases of abuse that you see now are almost always abuse via neglect. It comes more down to that economic factor of the horse that they can't afford and can't get rid of, and thus it gets tied to a trailer at a sale barn or turned loose in a national park or starves to death in the back 40. And again, in that case, through the lawsuits of the animal rights and all, the U.S. government owns way more starving horses than the private horse population of the United States does. The only difference is nobody goes to jail when they have horses that are a body condition score 1 versus if I do. Another side of that, I have a good friend, lives 15 miles from me here, and his place happens to be at one of these roundabouts that has a lot of traffic at it. And he kind of has the habit of picking up a horse that's in really bad shape and bringing it to his place and feeding him up, and 3 or 4 months later, and then he'll swap that one up. He constantly has the animal control sent out there to his place, and they have to respond to the call, but they know exactly who he is. They know exactly what he's doing. But you have some well-meaning person that drives by. He's got a skinny horse in the corral. It's visible from the road right there. And he is in a constant state of having to deal with that stuff, just like we're talking about the USEF and the anonymous callers and all of that stuff. So even people that are trying to do things exactly correctly are still going to be accused of this stuff in the world that we live in right now. We've been doing this quite a while, guys. I don't know if y'all have to go. I'm satisfied with where we have gotten to. If there's any particular point either of you want to hit on, something that you've been wanting to get off your chest or whatever, I'll give you the opportunity, and then we'll wrap this up.
I think I'm good. I think we got quite a bit covered. If somebody listens to this whole thing, they're going to be probably on the road doing it, but I think they'll get the gist of it. But we're at a crisis stage, and I know people say this a lot, and I've tried to ring the bell for years and years, but it's apathy kills us. So we need to, complacency and apathy is what's going to kill us. And like you alluded to earlier, I think Colton actually alluded to that, where people are out there going, oh, Dave and Western Justice, they're out there, they're going to take care of this. But the big thing is we need help. We can't afford this. I mean, look at what happened to Protect the Harvest. I mean, Protect the Harvest is gone. It had Lucas Oil money behind it. It's gone because of lack of funding. And nobody else was helping fund it. So they were doing it all on their own. And now with the new generation coming in, that's a really good point to make too. There's these people that have been doing this stuff. I'm trying to build Western Justice to where it goes way past me. I'll be dead and gone. Somebody else like Colton will be taking over, and it'll keep going and keep the same process going, the same mentality. We're the only ones actually out there doing the hard work and holding people accountable to it. All these other organizations are out there, and they do the placating, and they do the politically correct thing or whatever it is. There's nobody else out there doing the hard work. And that's one of the reasons I left Protect the Harvest in 2020, was because Protect the Harvest was because the next generation was coming in. They didn't like it. They didn't like what I did as far as how much we actually fought, litigated, did all the, got the Hammond's pardon, got all these kind of things done. They didn't like that. The son didn't like that. So he wanted to become an educational group. I'm a high school educated Marine. I'm a fighter. I'm not an educator. So I want to fight. I want to block these bullies from doing what they're doing and what I see. And I want to be able to do that and have that go on in forever. But there's these foundations that are out there that start off with the matriarch and patriarch of the foundation. There's a big one in Oklahoma called the Kirkpatrick Foundation that started off from a big oil family with hundreds of millions of dollars in it. And it was supposed to be to promote agriculture and land use. And now it's been perverted to the point where 2 people on the board are from the Humane Society of the United States. And they're funding almost everything that Oklahoma State University has built. They fund almost all of this stuff, and they're worming their way in to that. And now that foundation that was supposed to be set up to help people like us and what we're doing is now helping the other side. And that's where, we started Rural American Action. I don't know, we didn't talk about that at all. We started our own platform. One of my biggest donors paid $250,000 to have this platform set up. Rural American Action is a crowdfund. It's 3 platforms in one. It's a crowdfunding, a petitions and polling, so it's like GoFundMe, Change.org, and SurveyMonkey, all in one platform. For us, the reason we did that is because we put a petition for the LA rodeo situation on pro rodeo on change.org. Change.org, people thought they were, with their little chip in deal, thought they were giving money to us to help us with this. Change.org raised out of 36,000 signatures, they raised $29,000. We don't see a dime of that. Change.org takes that. Well, guess what? When I looked into Change.org's foundation, who they fund with their foundation, they fund all the people that want to put us out of business. So why is rural America and our world funding that by using GoFundMe and all that stuff? So that's why we developed this platform. We've done a soft launch on it. We had to work through some bugs, but now it was created by people in the industry, and it should be the go-to. And if we could get just a fraction of what those other groups get, like change.org has 500 million users worldwide. If we could get just a fraction of that in rural America to start using ours, all the money that's generated from fees, and our fees are actually lower than change.org or GoFundMe or any of those others, but all the money generated from those fees goes right back into our C3. That's a business under our C3. It's not a business for Dave to make money or anybody else. It is for Western Justice to be able to protect our lifestyle.
Well, we'll definitely have links to all Dave's stuff, and I would highly encourage anybody out there to go join or donate or get involved in some way. If you're going to have a hard time selling that horse trailer when nobody can haul a horse anymore. So even if you got any self-preservation about you, we are nearing a critical state here. Colton, you have any final words for us?
No, I think the only thing that I want to say to kind of wrap this thing up is just that a lot of times in the industry, it's a lot of, you see a lot of people that are competing against each other, right? Trainers trying to compete against trainers for business and to winnings and those sorts of things. And what Teton Ridge has been interesting with a team type aspect to bring a community of people together behind a type of an event. And I think when we're talking about a cause of trying to keep this lifestyle alive and try to keep our way of life going in what we do as professionals and what people get to enjoy with their kids and build marriage. I mean, I wouldn't have met my wife, right, had it not been for horses. And all of us have all these stories of the things of how horses in this way of life run so deep within who we are and what we do and how it's benefited us. And sometimes on the day-to-day, it's easy to get caught up on competing with each other and the things and the differences. And this is one of those things of getting behind Western Justice and getting behind keeping this industry and this way of life alive that should be bringing us all together. And when we're sitting here talking about, how do we self-police and how we do that thing, how does that improve through self-policing? And I think that it ultimately starts with the fact that we're all fighting the same fight, regardless of what kind of tack you use, if you wear a helmet, if you wear a hat, it doesn't matter, right? We all want to keep this way of life going. And if we can audit ourselves and going, is what I'm doing going to allow us to continue moving forward? And we can all get behind the fact that we're in this together. And I always say, like, together we rise, right? The better that we all get, the better this industry gets, and the better that we can move forward. And sometimes we got to stop for a little bit and stop trying to cut each other's throats. And it's like all good to go compete, right? It's all good to have that competitive spirit because that does make us better, right? As an industry, as when we are competing, but then we have to have that community aspect of realizing that, very much in a way, how this country came together after 9/11. Right. You look at the difference in how people as Americans, it didn't matter what side of the aisle you sat on, whether you were in a red shirt or a blue shirt, it did not matter. Everybody was an American and was proud to stand for the 50 stars, the 13 stripes behind the red, white, and blue. And as an industry of the Western way of life and within the horse industry, we I really do believe that we need that same kind of spirit of realizing, hey, we can all have different ways of training horses and different beliefs on whether we should breed to gunner or not breed to gunner. We can have different belief systems and still come together as an adult, have have difficult conversations, agree to disagree on certain things, but understand that our actions should all be supporting keeping this way of life alive, and that can bring us together. And I think that kind of, in a way, gives us a framework to self-police, because if we audit our actions and going, is this holding, is what I'm doing, is what I'm saying, is what I'm putting out on the internet actually potentially hurting our way of life, or the potential for our way of life to continue? It's a pretty easy filter to run that through. And if it's like, yeah, I don't know that that's the best thing in mind, then maybe not do it anymore. Right. And then we're progressing, and then we're moving forward. And, it's one of those things that there's a lot of power to Dave's point here with Western Justice, of looking at how many people are involved in the Western way of life. And I think there's so many ways to skin this cat, and going, hey, is it a $10 a month, a $25 a month donation that you're able to commit to, or something as simple as like, hey, every time you sell a horse, or every time you do something within your business, if you're a professional, can you allocate $5, $10, $25 to go towards that fund, right? And it's almost in a way, you do a self-imposed tax, right? And going, hey, like when this industry gives back to me, I give back in a way that this way of life can continue. And I think that if we could get some kind of framework like that in place, and it starts with people going, I'm going to make that commitment. I'm going to make the commitment to make sure that this way of life continues, then there's more people and more money in this business to fight these people than we ever need. Right. But we've got to come together as an industry and make that commitment. And so I'm hoping that people got this far, and hopefully this might help push a few people to go to Western Justice site and sign up for one of the funds that you can support them through, whether it's $25 or $1,000, whatever it is, because we all need to come together.
Yeah, our C4 is we have both organizations. We have a C4, which is our legislative fund that does all the political work, and then we have a C3, which is our educational group that does all the documentaries and all that kind of stuff, and educating. But so we have a foundation. People with foundations can donate to the C3. They can't donate to the C4. C4's the two main differences is a C4 is not a tax deductible donation, other than if you do it through a business, or your business as a horse trainer, you can deduct that as a fee for a business expense. But the C3 part is like I said, it's a tax deductible donation. So we've set up, we started off with a $50 flat rate membership, and that was it. I had a lot of people call me and ask me, hey, I want to give you more money. How do I give you more money? So we set it up with now it's $25, $50, $100, $250, $500, and $1,000. So and honestly, I get more memberships that are the 100 to 1,000 than I do the 25. And it's because people want to put more money towards it. There's no difference in memberships, because all of our money goes towards the projects and the causes that we're working on. And we're very tight about it. Anybody can go look at our 990s and see what we do. We've got a 4-year track record now, since 2020 when we started. So we spend our money wisely, and it's very there's a very high rate of as far as nonprofits go. We should be on GuideStar. We should start getting up in the top of that here as they start looking at us. But GuideStar rates all the nonprofits, and we're at a 78% or better amount of money goes towards the programs versus towards staff or anything else. So that's pretty high, because most nonprofits are down in the 20s.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank and commend both of you for coming on here and having a conversation that you're absolutely guaranteed to get some shit over. I know those are never conversations that are easy to have, and I hope the aftermath for you is more positive than negative, and I hope that that maybe we do bring some awareness or institute some change. A few people will think better of it, or whatever, then maybe we'll be able to save this thing.
We'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dolphin.